Okay. Jeremy.
Good morning.
Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Florida in America.
And what was your childhood like?
My childhood was, I was born and raised in Florida. I grew up there my entire life. And my parents were divorced when I was, I think I was about 12 years old back then. And so then we just lived with my mom. And we lived in a couple different parts of Florida, South and Central Florida. But we were always well off. We were never like struggling really or anything. We always had everything we needed and more. So we didn't have a really tough childhood. There were two of us. I have a brother, and there were family problems, but like we always had what we needed, you know. We weren't like abandoned kids or something. So we had a decent life compared to a lot of people, I would say.
So you didn't grow up with your father?
No, our father and mom got divorced when I was, what, 13? About 13. I can't remember if it was 13 or a little earlier. But so he was there in the earlier years. Actually, they ended up getting remarried, both of them, to each other, and then got divorced again. So it was kind of chaotic.
What type of teenager were you?
I was, as a teenager, I was what I would call a typical worldly teenager, in the sense that being like a young boy, you know, you're just goofing off with your friends and getting into some trouble and chasing girls and stuff like that. What I would call a typical foolish teenager. That's what I would say.
And you went to college?
Yeah, I went to college in Central Florida at a college that's called University of Florida, and I studied computer sciences, and I graduated in 1999, and after that I worked in the industry. I had a job for 4 years as a programmer, and that was before I came to the Philippines as a missionary. So I only worked for 4 years in the industry after college.
And then what did you do?
After college, it was shortly after college I got a job, and it was also about that time in my life where I came to know Jesus Christ, because I grew up just a very non-religious person and not interested in God or anything, just interested in worldly, secular stuff, a lot of sinful stuff. But when I was 22 years old, I came to know Jesus Christ, and so that totally changed the direction of my life. I had new desires, and my main desire was to do mission work, and so I ended up being a missionary here in the Philippines. I came here in 2003, October 2003, and I've been here ever since now.
You became a pastor already in Florida?
My church back home in Florida, well, they sent me out as a missionary. So when you're sent out as a missionary, you're also called a missionary pastor a lot of times. It kind of depends on the culture. But here in the Philippines, if you're a missionary, they also call you a pastor. As a missionary, what we do is a lot of evangelistic stuff, teaching people about Jesus Christ and His salvation for our sins, and then starting churches. And so the people here, they call me pastor. And for example, in this church here that we started back in 2004, I'm still what they call the missionary pastor up to this point today.
Why specifically Philippines?
It's just a calling from God. So God spoke to my heart, and I was praying where to go do mission work. I had a good idea that God wanted me to do foreign mission work. I just didn't know exactly where. But I was doing Bible school also back for 3 years, starting back in 2000. And at the same time, I had visited some other countries, and I was praying where God wanted me to go and do mission work. So I made a visit here to the Philippines back in June of 2003. And at that time, I could feel God calling me to come back and do full-time mission work here. So after that time, I had gone back home, and I resigned from my job and took care of stuff and came back in October to do full-time mission work.
Tell me about that. That must have been very scary to like quit your job and come to the Philippines. That must have been.
From a perspective, it might seem like that. For me, as a person of faith, I trust God to provide everything, and I just don't worry about stuff. I don't worry about anything. Death is nothing more than a door to heaven, even so. There's nothing to fear, and I just trust God. And you might look at it as something that's like a crazy decision. And of course, like I have friends who didn't understand, co-workers and family members who didn't understand, and they think you're doing something crazy, like you're throwing your life away. But I tell them that you have to realize you are also spending your life on something, and most people are spending their life trying to accumulate things that they're going to leave behind anyhow. So I focus on terms of like savings, on eternal savings, not temporary things. I don't care about temporary, materialistic, financial things.
So it wasn't difficult to make the move?
For me, it was exciting. It wasn't difficult. It was something I was really excited to do because I had been preparing to do it for a few years. And that's why I had started going to a Bible school, studying in a Bible school back at my home church, and becoming more prepared to do mission work. And so when it came time that I knew where God wanted me to go, I was excited. I wasn't worried. I was more like I was more impatient. Like I want to go now. I want to start now. It's just for me, fear is the opposite of faith. So when you walk by faith, you just don't worry about that stuff. You just go.
So you arrived in the Philippines in 2003?
Yeah, back in October 2003.
So what were like the first years over here like?
My first years, as a missionary, our primary goal is evangelistic work and planning churches and teaching national indigenous people to do ministry also. But at the same time, I spent like 6 months learning the language here in the Philippines. I had a private language tutor and kind of adapting to the culture. That was also the time when I met the girl who became my wife, because I came here as a single. So initially I thought I would just do like mission work kind of like the Apostle Paul did, who was a single missionary. But I met Christine, who became my wife, and so we started a family too. So I was very busy with everything, with the ministry and starting a family. But it was very, very exciting. It's just the time just vanished. Even today, I've been here now for 21 years, and it doesn't feel like 21 years. It feels like just a couple years.
And you've only lived here now for the last 21 years?
Yeah. 21 years now.
Like in different parts of Philippines, or just in?
Just here. I live here in Pampanga. We have a house, actually, a little house right here behind the church. And we've started ministries in other places, but this is where I've lived, in this place immediately. And it's become more of a permanent kind of setup because we started the orphanage, and I live right next door to the orphanage. And I'm the director of the orphanage, kind of the one in charge, and I have to be here very regularly. It'd be very difficult at this point for me to be away from the orphanage for an extended period of time. So I'm still here.
So what led to the founding of this orphanage?
The orphanage, we started it back in March of 2017. We brought in the first kids that we ever had here. And what happened was, over the years, we would do like a lot of evangelistic stuff in slum and squatter areas where you would see a a lot of the kids who are in trouble, like kids who are out of school, collecting trash and stuff instead of going to school, you know, abandoned kids. So over the years, as you saw more and more of it, you want to help them out. Our primary focus is always spiritual, but at the same time, we don't just ignore the physical hardships, especially of those who are helpless people and not ready to take care of themselves like a kid, you know. So initially, I would do a lot of stuff to try to help kids where they are, you know, like helping them with food and stuff where they are. But a lot of it I saw wasn't going very far. As an example, you might give a kid a piece of clothing, and then the next thing you know, they're not using the clothing. The clothing is gone. And I said, "Where's the clothes I gave you?" And he's like, "Oh, my mom sold it, so she has money to play bingo." So stuff like that would happen. So anyhow, I came to the point where I realized if I was really going to help out these kids to have a better life, even physically speaking, we would need to start a shelter, orphanage kind of thing where we would be the ones who take the kids and take care of them. So what happened is there were some kids that we were bringing to church, and one of the groups was abandoned because the father was in prison and the mom ran off with another guy and just left the 3 kids behind. So those were the first 3 kids that we just took in, started taking care of just in our house. And then after that we brought in more and more, and so the orphanage grew to the point where we bought some more land and started building facilities just for the orphanage. And up to today, we're still building more facilities. So.
How many kids do you have here today?
Currently, there's 145 kids that live in the orphanage of all different ages. We have babies up to youth. We have college students now, 2 college students. So it's a vast mixture of ages. Pretty much all ages are there.
So when they turn 18 years old and they're like thrown out, or what happens?
No. For example, we have 2 kids who are in college now. Well, they're not kids anymore. They're actually, one of them is 20 years old and the other one's 21 years old. So one's a 4th year and the other one's a 3rd year college student. So when they're 18, they're no longer a legal minor. They're a legal adult, you know. But the thing is the kids here are so far behind with their education. If they turn 18 and then you just say, "Goodbye, go take care of yourself," most of them wouldn't know what to do. They're not prepared for a decent livelihood, you know. They're just not prepared, because you might have a kid, for example, who's 16 years old. There's a 16-year-old boy here who's only now in kindergarten because he lived his life on the streets. So if this kid turns 18 and then I send him back to the streets, he still doesn't know how to read or write barely. What's he gonna do? He'll go back to stealing or collecting trash, getting into drugs. And so some of these kids will have to be here for an extended period of time. We have what we would call an independent living program, which just means we want to see the kids prepared to stand up on their own feet and have a decent career, an honest career, and you know, not have to go back to resort to collecting trash and stealing and stuff to get food. So that's not going to be possible for most of these kids by the time they're 18 years old. They're not going to be ready for that. So they'll have to be here for a longer period of time until they're ready. And we want to see, we want to see them follow God, and if God leads them to a college, you know, course where they can be prepared for a particular career, we want to make sure that that happens.
You have like some orphans left this facility here? Because too old and...
No, we haven't had like kids who have like aged out, so to speak. We do sometimes have family reintegrations wherein a child is able to go back to a family situation, or they find a different family member who's capable and willing to take care of the child. But family reintegrations are not that common. So the majority of the kids are here for long-term care. So we haven't reached the point where you have a kid who's like so old that you just say, oh, you have to leave because you're this age. And we won't do that to the kids. We want to bring them to the point where they can learn to, have a job and be able to have a job and work for themselves. So, and that is close to happening because we have a college student now who's 4th year. So once she finishes her 4th year and has a job, she won't be one of the kids in the orphanage anymore. But that would be like a success story because she reached the point where she now has her own career and she doesn't need anyone to take care of her anymore.
What sort of situations do the kids come from?
We have
What's going on with their parents?
there's a vast, array of problems. You have abandoned kids, abused kids, severely neglected kids. So if you go through it all, you got kids who are abandoned, who they just grew up on the streets and they have no idea who their parents or any family relatives are, and nobody knows. They're just the kind of kids who they'll be sleeping on the side of the streets and get up during the day and go out and beg for food and money or steal, and there's just a lot of that. And so there's no idea who their family members are. Other kids are, we have a lot of abuse victims, which is very rampant in the Philippines now, especially with the girls, but also with boys too. And so in abuse situations, a lot of times you have parents who have been imprisoned or the kids can't be with the parents anymore because of what happened. You also have those who come out of drug situations. So when you got parents who are involved in drugs, and a lot of times you even have the moms who end up in prison, the kids are very rarely going to be able to go home to that situation. So it's there's a lot of different problems. We also have kids who are literally orphaned in the sense that both of their parents have died, and then there's no other known relatives. We have those kinds of cases too.
With these kids, like they don't know when their birthday is. They don't know what their birth year is.
The abandoned kids, yeah, that's the way it is with the abandoned kids. They don't even know their name. They just have a nickname or something. But the kids, like the kids who come out of families where there might have been abuse or serious neglect, in a lot of those situations, you'll know their names and birthdays. They might have birth certificates already, although not always. But the kids who are coming from abandoned situations, there's literally nothing available. They don't even know who they are. All they have is a nickname. Like a kid comes in and he says, he's been living on the streets, and so he's brought here, and you ask him, what's your name? And he just says his name is Nito. That's the only thing he knows. Other kids, they don't even have, some kid came here one time, they didn't even have a nickname for the kid. So I just named him Joe, and so everyone calls him Joe. And then we choose their day of admission as their birthday. So if they're brought here on June 7th, 2023, we make that their birthday, for example.
And you make the birth year just the best guess?
Yeah, you can make a guess based upon a dental visit. You can make an ocular inspection and kind of, make an estimate, but a dental visit will help out a little bit too. But it's impossible to say for sure.
And then you get them registered, give them a specific birth date. Then.
Yeah, we can after time. It takes some time, but with our social workers, we can get them a birth certificate. It takes a little while when it's an abandonment case, but it can be done.
So the orphanage started in 2017, so now it's been going on for 7 years?
Yeah, March 2017 is when it officially started. So this coming March, it'll be 8 years now. So we're at 7.5 years now. And it's just happened really fast.
So are there any memorable stories with specific kids over the last 7 or 8 years?
They're all very, very memorable. Actually, we're pretty close. We're really close to all the kids, and of course, as kids stay here longer and longer, you kind of get more attached to them as time goes on. And so we have kids who have been here now for 7 years, more than 7 years, 6 years, a lot of kids, 5 years, a lot of kids, because they just don't have anywhere to go. So they really just kind of, you know, you feel like they're your kids. You start to feel that way, and they look to you as like, you know, you're their parents too. And it just kind of automatically develops that kind of a relationship with them. So it's, in terms of memories, yeah, there's just millions of memories here already in 7 years. So it would take, you know, you'd have to have a book as tall to the clouds to write about it all.
So, how do you find the kids? How does that work? Because there's a lot of street kids, but which ones do get to come here and which ones stay on the street?
The way we can bring a child into the orphanage, there's 2 ways actually. One is called voluntary surrender, and then the other is called by referral. So what that means is voluntary surrender. If we find a kid, if we personally know a kid that's in trouble and there's any known family member, if that family member is willing to sign an admission form with us, with our social workers, that child can be legally admitted into the orphanage. When I say referral, what that means is a social welfare person from one of the cities has been part of like a rescue operation, picking up kids off the streets, begging or something. And so after they get those kids, they can bring them to us, because most of the government agencies here, they don't have their own shelters. So they rely on us, people like us who have shelters that are called NGOs, non-government organizations, to provide the sheltering. So those are the 2 ways that a child can be admitted into the orphanage.
There are no government orphanages?
The government, as I know, has very few orphanages. They have a few. What typically happens though is, like local governments, you know, here in the Philippines you have what's called LGUs, local governments. Some local governments have a small shelter that's just like a temporary shelter. They often call them like drop-in shelters. So say for example in a city that has a lot of kids on the streets and stuff, abandoned, what they'll do is they'll pick up a kid that they find begging on the streets or something and take them to the government drop-in shelter, which is usually just like a single room or something. And from there, the kid will stay there for a little while until they can find a long-term, more permanent shelter, which is usually an NGO shelter. So the government doesn't have really many shelters that cater to long-term care. They have a lot of like small shelters sometimes in the larger cities, but in a lot of cities they don't even have those small shelters. They don't have anything. So almost all of the kids in the Philippines who are in shelters are in NGO shelters.
What kind of difficulties do you face as an orphanage manager?
A lot. The first thing that comes to mind is behavior problems. We got the kids that come in here, of course they're not well trained and well behaved, and you know, they haven't been disciplined and taught to act properly. So it's just kind of like catching a wild animal out in the forest, and you want to bring it home and have it become tame. It's not that easy. So you got kids who coming in and they just don't know right from wrong. They're just accustomed to stealing and fighting and all kinds of stuff. So you deal with a lot of that. That's a big thing. And of course, as you get more kids, you have more problems. So that's like the first thing that always comes to my mind when you say, what's the difficulty in the orphanage? So it's very difficult to handle all of their problems. Even a lot of our workers, they struggle. They don't know what to do in some situations. And sometimes I don't even know what to do in some situations. I don't know what to do. We always try talking to the kids and explaining, but that doesn't always work, and you just don't know what to do. It's tough. You have to have a lot of patience.
So how did you even learn the skills to manage an orphanage? It's just experience?
I didn't go through any kind of, program or educational thing like, oh, this is how to run an orphanage. I don't know of any books or anything like that. We just started doing it. For us, it just comes from the heart of Jesus Christ. It gives you the heart to want to help, and if you got the right heart, you'll kind of figure things out. You'll just study it for yourself and figure out, what do I need to do here? I see what needs to be done. It's difficult, but I'm going to try to do it. And in my history, though, I did have what you would call some preparation, in the sense that when I was back home in Florida at my home church, we started a ministry to kids who were coming out of inner city areas, and they were coming from broken homes, very violent kids. And I was ministering to those kids. A lot of them were from minority groups like African Americans and Hispanics. And they were very wild kids that I was working with. That kind of prepared me a little bit also for this orphanage, I think.
But you enjoy this work?
Yeah, it's very challenging. Of course, there's a lot of times where you're annoyed and stuff, But anything that God calls me to do, I will enjoy it, just because I know I'm doing God's calling in my life. There are a lot of difficulties. There's no question about that. You lose a lot of sleep. You lose a lot of vacation time and stuff. But it's a great blessing, number one, for me, like I said, because I know I'm doing something that God has called me to do. And then at the same time, it's very rewarding when you see kids that their lives are getting on the right track. Kids who are, number one, coming to know Jesus Christ, and their lives are changing, improving. They're starting to act properly. They're doing well in school. The initial problems, behavior problems and stuff start going away. So when you see that happen and you witness that happen, it's extremely rewarding to see.
How many people work here?
Currently we have 3 social workers. We're required to have social workers who are licensed social workers. So they went to college and they passed the board exam. So we have 3 of them. And then what we have are called house parents. So house parents also, they live in here. And currently we have 11 house parents. And then me and my wife, we are like the directors. So all in all, that makes 16 of us currently that work here in the orphanage.
Where do you get the funding?
Our funding here is, we call it by faith funding. In other words, we don't go out and do solicitation and stuff. We just trust the Lord to provide. And so what happens is there are churches and people and groups and sometimes companies that end up wanting to support the orphanage financially. And so our funding comes from all kinds of different areas. When you look at it, it all comes from God ultimately, but He uses people, churches, groups. Sometimes there's families that want to help out. A couple of companies that support the orphanage on a regular basis too. Companies here in the Philippines.
There have been difficulties with that?
With funding.
You have enough funding?
The funding has always been, we've never reached a point where it's like there's no more, but we've reached very critical areas where it's like, ooh, a very, very dangerous, critical area here. There are ups and downs. The thing is like currently with the 145 kids, we have a huge budget. For us, what we would view as huge, because it's over 500,000 pesos a month to run the orphanage, the basic operating expenses, your food, all of the different grocery stuff, schooling, medicines, the salaries and everything. So it starts to grow really fast. And for me personally, I sometimes look at it and I'm like, this can become worrisome, because I came to the Philippines as a single missionary with a very small budget that can do nothing to have an orphanage. So all of this funding, where's it going to come from? But I just, when we started the orphanage and as we started to take in more kids, I just prayed to God and I said, God, if you want this to happen, I know you will provide. We have a saying as Christians, if it's God's will, it's God's bill. So he'll take care of it. And so there have been times when it just kind of tests your faith because you see the budget, the savings or the current, fund savings dwindling. And you have all these kids to feed and stuff. But it's never reached a point where there's no more, But there are times when you're challenged in your faith, but then the Lord will suddenly provide. And so we've never had like a huge excess of funds, but it's always been, sufficient. And even as it's grown, little by little, more supporters have come on board.
What has been the most difficult point?
The most difficult point for like the orphanage in general, or
the darkest hour?
The darkest hour. We did have a child that passed away. We had a baby that was brought to us, and it turned out the baby, who was just going on 1 year old, was born with a lot of problems, including heart disease and stuff. And the baby suddenly got sick, really sick. And we took the baby to the hospital and everything. And the next day the baby passed away. And it was very traumatizing for us. I would say that would be like the darkest hour, the saddest thing that has happened, the toughest thing to go through. We've experienced that.
That has been like the most difficult part of your whole life?
In my whole life personally?
Yeah.
In my whole life personally, I've never, I would say kind of the most difficult thing personally in my personal life was, just looking back on my life, was like there were tough times growing up without the father and that kind of thing, But at the same time, when we had a child pass away in the orphanage, a really cute little boy, a very sweet, cute little boy. And so going through that was really tough too. So I don't know if I can pinpoint in my personal life, like, oh, this was the darkest time in my life or most difficult time. But definitely in the orphanage, that was the saddest thing that we ever experienced.
Do you think there's a connection between you not having a father and now you're being a manager of orphanage? Like you want to be a father to like hundreds of children?
I don't know. I've never thought about that. I mean, my dad was with us, for like my first 13 years. And then there were some more years when they got remarried and he was still there. We were just never all that close and all, but I do want to be like a father figure unto these kids, and I know the importance of having a good father influence unto the kids and all, and just try to do my best. And my wife and all the workers who put in so much time, and like our workers, they live here. It's not a Monday to Friday job. They live here every day. They live and sleep here. They're here every day, every night. This is where they eat and everything. And so it's not like just me who feels like I'm a parent to the kids, but it's all the workers because they all develop a bond to the kids. They really become attached and they love the kids. And so it's kind of like the kids have a bunch of parents here who love them. They look up to me as like kind of their, the head father kind of thing of the orphanage, and like to my wife like that. But the kids, they have very close bonds to the other workers too. And that's what we need to happen, because it's impossible for one person to be a parent to 100 kids. That's not going to work out too well. So we like to have workers who have a real compassionate heart to the kids. And so we try our best just to make the kids feel like at home as much as possible, And I see overall I see that happening, and the kids feeling at home and being happy and just acting like normal kids would act. So that's a blessing to see too.
So there's still a lot of kids on the street. So do you sometimes feel like you feel like you're making a difference, a small difference or a big difference?
When you look at the entire situation, yeah, it's tough because here in the Philippines there's so much this stuff. For example, I heard years back ago that the Department of Social Welfare would talk about 1.8 million orphan children in the Philippines, and that's a lot. They have released a new number which says 5 million is the new estimate. And of course, you go around in cities and areas, especially if you go through Manila and stuff, and you see, anytime you go by a bridge, you got kids living underneath the bridge. You go through some of these areas and like Tondo and Navotas, and there's places where kids are like sleeping in the jeeps and stuff and collecting trash during the days. And the situation is so rampant. And that's just in some of these places. You combine it all together and there's so much. So it's very easy to look at the situation and say, like, even if I was providing shelter to 1,000 kids, I would still barely be scraping the surface of the problem. And that's the reality, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean we're not going to help anybody. You just help as many as you can, do the most you can, and little by little, we've had growth too. And I don't know how many kids we'll end up having in the future. I just leave that up to God. I say, God, if you want us to have 500 kids, then I know you'll provide for it. If you want us to have only 100 kids, then that's okay. It's up to God. I just do whatever God leads me to do. So if God brings me 1,000 kids, then I'll take care of the 1,000 kids. That's up to the Lord.
What do you think is the root cause of this? Because if it's not just a couple of kids, if it's millions of orphans, millions of people, millions of kids who need help, what's the root cause of this? Is it like Filipino culture or drugs or what's going on?
For me, as a Christian, the root cause is Satan. Satan is the enemy of all mankind, the destroyer of everything. He is the one who uses things like drugs or perversions in people that do wicked things to their kids and stuff. But he's the ultimate mastermind, who's the destroyer of mankind in general. He hates mankind. And so you can't see Satan, but you can see his footprints. It's like, we haven't seen a T-Rex, but we found the bones. We've seen footprints and stuff. And humanity, if you look at humanity and all of the wickedness that happens, the ultimate root cause is it's a spiritual problem. And so we have a spiritual enemy, and his name is Satan. And he hates everything that God loves. He hates people, he hates families, he hates everything. So I believe it's a spiritual root cause.
Do you think overpopulation is a problem?
Overpopulation, actually, I don't believe overpopulation is a problem in general, although in some families, you do have the situations where families have so many kids and they're not able to provide for them. But the thing is this, our world has enough resources to provide the needs for billions upon billions of people. That's not the issue. What happens in some families, though, is like you have a poor family that has, say, 6 or 8 kids. So the majority of those kids are going to the streets and begging. That happens too. Now the question, though, is why is this family so poor? Why do they stay poor? I should rephrase maybe. A lot of people start out poor, but then they work hard and end up with a better life. A lot of families, what happens is you have a lot of situations where people are lazy to work, and even what little money they have, they waste it on alcohol and drugs and gambling. And so that's what happens in a lot of these situations. If you're talking about like overpopulation, I don't believe there's a problem with overpopulation in the world in general. But a lot of families end up with problems because they have so many kids. It's like they're overpopulated in their house. But a lot of that goes back to bad parenting, lazy parents or parents who are addicted to vices and stuff and waste money that could be used for the well-being of their family on whatever sinful stuff. And so that's what ends up happening.
I think it's a generational problem because like the grandparents are like they have problems, they are poor, and then the parents have a tough childhood, and then the orphans have a really difficult childhood.
I don't believe you can attribute or like blame. I don't like to blame my situation because of say something my grandparent did. I believe in personal responsibility, personal accountability, personal responsibility. Like if, say for example, my parents were wicked people, I'm not going to use that as an excuse for me to be wicked as well. I can be different. It's up to me. And so, like in the orphanage, we teach the kids that, you don't have to be what what you're coming out of. You can come out of this, and it's like what the Bible says, all things work together for good. Not all things are good, but they can work together for good if we follow God in our lives. So these kids are coming out of impoverished families. Doesn't mean they have to grow up and be poor and drug users and all that. They can choose to follow God in righteousness and work hard and have an honest, respectful living. And I believe that applies for anybody. I mean, of course, when you're talking about a kid, you have to help the kid out at first. You can't say to a 6-year-old kid, hey, go work. You got to help them get to that point, of course. But you don't want them to stay, you don't want them to be the next generation of poor drug users. You don't want to see that happening, of course.
And so have you seen a lot of, when the kids come here and they're very wild, they're unorganized, then they come here and then after some months or after some years they get better? Like, does that happen all the time? Or?
That happens very frequently here. Yeah, we have a very strict discipline set up here. So the kids, they have to learn. We don't tolerate all the crazy behavior, and so we help them out in understanding what's right and wrong. And like I said, above all, when a child comes to the point that they realize that they need Jesus Christ in their life as their Savior, and anybody accepts Jesus Christ, they become what the Bible calls a new creature. And you have a new heart that beats for righteousness. And even though we're a sinner by nature, we have a new heart that doesn't want to sin anymore. And so we can learn to do the right thing and live a righteous life and reject temptations. And so we see that in a lot of kids here, kids who were really crazy kids. But the change that they have, it's not what I would call like a temporal reformation, but a spiritual transformation that comes from faith in Jesus Christ.
And have there also been like kids who've come here and they were crazy and they're still the same? They're just not changing? We
have kids that, especially like newer kids, yeah, it's not all of them who just are excited to come to learn about God and get their lives right. It takes time with a lot of them. So we just have to be patient with them, and we do our best to be patient with them and to extend the love of God unto them and be patient and work hard with them. And it takes a lot of time for a lot of them. It does. It's not always automatic.
And what's the big plan for the future now, for the orphanage?
We just want to keep on doing what we're doing. What we're doing is exactly what we want to do, and our goals, we're striving to them. The only question is like how many kids will we end up helping, Unfortunately, the problem in the Philippines is growing, and it's becoming more rampant with all of the abandoned, abused kids. So currently we're building another shelter. It's just right nearby the current shelter. It's only 5 minutes away. Additional facilities. That'll end up being our girls' shelter, and this will be our boys' shelter. And like all in all, we'll be able to handle more than 300, maybe up to 400 kids with all of the facilities on these lands that we currently have. So in other words, we'll be able to double our capacity in the orphanage throughout the coming years, or who knows how fast. But I just leave that up to God. So we're doing what we know needs to be done. The question is how many more will we end up helping? And that, I don't know. We'll see.
And the girls and the boys, they have to be separated?
Well, they have to be in different rooms. They don't have to we're not required to have like a different piece of land for the girls or something like that. But that's just something we did here. Because we bought another piece of land back in 2023, and it's just 5 minutes away. So we decided we'll use that for the girls' shelter. But here, the girls and boys, they do have to be separated. They can't stay in the same rooms, so they're in different rooms. And so what will end up happening is this other piece of land we have will end up being just for all girls. So.
And you're hoping to run the orphanage until the rest of your life now?
Well, I always have in my mind, I want to have someone who is able to do what I'm doing in my absence. You know, there needs to be other leadership trained up, people who are willing to do this and are competent and willing to make the sacrifice to lead out something like this. So currently, I don't have anybody I'm training currently. Like my wife can do a lot of the stuff I do, but she can't do it all. You really need a male figure because you have a lot of youth boys that can have a lot of violent behavior problems, and you need a guy, a man who will step in there and they will respect and have even a fearful respect for in some situations that they wouldn't typically have for most ladies. So, I mean, there's situations here sometimes where they're calling me, Pastor, this kid is doing this and that, you have to come. And nobody else can handle it except for me. So that happens, especially with youth boys, some of the more violent type of kids. So in the future, yeah, I want to have people who can handle this stuff if I'm not here anymore, which obviously will happen one day, and I hope it will continue on in my absence.
So what are the jobs of an orphanage manager?
As the orphanage manager, it's very, very, there's so much to it. There is paperwork involved in terms of what we have to do to be licensed and stuff like that, taking care of this and that, permits and stuff. I'm able to distribute some of that to some of our other workers, like our social workers and stuff. But on a day-to-day basis, I have to oversee everything, and it's very important that you make sure that the workers are doing what they need to be doing, and just making periodic checkups on things, making sure this and that is happening, making sure that everything is going right in each of the rooms, and the overall, we have to make sure, we got all the food we order is coming in, and all of that stuff, and all of the supplies are there. So you have to make sure you have all of the needs on hand. And I do a report every 2 months, a bi-monthly report. I'm the one who does that currently. That takes some time. So it's just kind of like you're there every day, and you have to look over so much stuff every day.
Do you have regrets of your whole life?
In my personal life?
In your whole life?
A lot of regrets. My greatest regret, personally, in my personal life, would be that I didn't accept the Lord into my life at an earlier age. I wish I would have started serving the Lord earlier in my life. I came to know the Lord and started serving Him when I was 22 years old. So it's like my first 22 years were just wasted in sin and foolishness. So I wish I would have started serving the Lord earlier. That would be my main regret. Even with the orphanage though, I wish I would have started that earlier, even earlier than when I did. Because sometimes I think I was kind of putting it off. I didn't want to have an orphanage. So I just want to help the kids where they are, help the kids in the slum areas. And in my mind, I'm like, that's enough, I just go out and help them with this and that and visit them and stuff. But I saw over time it was going to take more to really help out some of these kids in a lot of these situations. So I finally started the orphanage in 2017, which I probably should have started earlier. I feel like I should have started earlier.
And so you got into Christianity when you were 22 years old?
Yeah, when I was 22 years old. My mom was a Christian beforehand. My dad wasn't, but my mom was the first Christian in our family, and she wanted all of us to be Christians. We just weren't interested. We were very worldly and just not interested in spiritual things. Just interested in carnal things and worldly things, you know, and money and stuff like that. So when I was 22 years old, that's the point in my life where I finally came to accept Jesus Christ. And that's where a person becomes a Christian, when they accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. You admit you're a sinner, you need a Savior, and you realize the Savior is only Jesus Christ. And when you accept Him, your life is just, there's a radical change that you can't even begin to explain at the beginning, but you know you don't want to continue in sin anymore, and you want to serve God. You don't know how necessarily, and that's why you have to study the Bible and get involved in church and everything, but that's what happened in my life at the age of 22. And at that time, I had a career, and I wanted to resign from my career immediately. I didn't even want to do it anymore. I just wanted to serve God with my entire life. So everything changed.
So if you would have one wish, let's say God gave you one wish and you could wish for anything, to know something or for something to change, what would you wish for?
My greatest desire is to see more people to come to know Jesus Christ. That is what I believe to be the greatest need of man. Every single person is going to die, and we're going to face God personally as judge. Those who are saved, who have accepted Jesus Christ, they won't be judged. Those who have not received Jesus Christ, the Bible says that they will be judged with eternal hell, and I don't want that to happen. God doesn't want that to happen, and that's why He provided salvation. So in my life, my main focus is always bringing people to Jesus Christ. Even with the orphanage ministry, we teach the children about Jesus Christ. We have a motto we use in the orphanage. We say, food in their tummies and Christ in their hearts. That just describes our overall mission as of the orphanage ministry, being a ministry of a church. And so even though we educate the kids and feed the kids and get them checkups and they're in the hospital and all this and that and stuff, taking care of all that stuff, there's still something even far much more important that we're doing for them, and that is providing for them their spiritual needs and introducing them to God, Jesus Christ. And we believe that's the greatest need of every single person. So my greatest desire in life is to see more people to come to know Jesus Christ. That's my personal great desire for the entire world.
Okay, Jeremy. Thank you.
All good.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Ragnar.